Don't know what to write in your discussion chapter? Or maybe you've started writing it already and it feels like you are just regurgitating your findings. Either way, don't worry, because in this video I'm going to give you an outline structure of headings to use in your discussion chapter. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Yardley and I've been supporting social science graduate students for the last 20 years. In that time, I've worked with a lot of students who just seem to hit a bit of a wall when it comes to their discussion chapter. And it's no wonder, because the chapters that come before the discussion, so the findings and the analysis, those chapters are quite heavy going. So by the time you get to the discussion, you're probably feeling a bit burned out. The discussion chapter is not an easy thing to write because it's where everything all comes together in your dissertation. It's where you look back at the existing literature and you think about your findings in the context of that existing literature. That's quite involved. It's a lot. It's intense. So maybe think about taking a bit of a break between finishing the previous chapters and starting the discussion chapter, because your brain probably needs a little bit of rest and recovery time. So go and just do something else, go and take a break from it, take some time out from it, and when you come back to it, it will not feel as impossible as it probably does now. When you do come back to it, make sure you use these headings. The first one is the introduction to the discussion chapter, and in this section you're providing a bit of a recap for your reader. You're revisiting your aims and your objectives. You're just bringing your reader's mind back to what it is that you set out to do. And after this, you're providing a really quick summary of what it was that you found in your study. So this is just a really high-level overview. There is no need to cite any statistics from your quantitative analysis or to include can't even get my words out today, or to include any lengthy quotes from your qualitative findings. So it just needs to be really high level, really snappy, really quick summary. There's no need to repeat and regurgitate lots of stuff in this introduction section, but what you're essentially trying to do is get your reader to zoom out, to go, yes, that's what they were looking at, that's what they set out to achieve, so here's what I can kind of expect to be covered in this chapter. And as I said just now about getting a bit burned out, a bit tired, by the time you get to the discussion chapter, I'm going to put some sentence starters up on the screen here for things that you might want to say in this introduction section, just to kind of get going and get started, because oh my goodness, if you're going to be lost for words anywhere in your dissertation, it's probably going to be in your discussion chapter. Oh, almost forgot. Another thing that you need to do in your discussion chapter, in this introductory section to it, is provide the reader with an overview of what you're going to be actually covering in the chapter. So the content, the order, but I would just leave this until you finished writing the whole of the discussion chapter, because what you think you're going to write about now might not be what you end up writing about. So when you start writing up your discussion chapter, it's probably worth putting in a few little bullet points to remind yourself that you need to give them this overview of the content and the structure, but don't start writing it up yet. The next part is the main body of your discussion chapter. This is the meat on the bones. This is where you revisit the existing literature that you looked at in your literature review, and you think about your findings in the context of that literature. You take a step back and you go, okay, right, so what? So what? Now that I've done my study, what does this study add to the existing literature? How can I look at the existing literature now in a different light? Like, what's going on now that all of the questionnaires and interviews and all of that stuff is done and is written up and is analysed? So what? In terms of the structure of this part of your discussion, I would say that you need between 3 and 5 main headings, because that's a really nice range of numbers to deal with here. You don't want any less than 3 headings, because if you have less than 3, you're going to be condensing and compacting loads of really detailed, complex information into like 2 headings or 1 heading at worst. And that's going to just overwhelm your examiner, because they're going to see that you've got, 1 or 2 headings, but they then have to do loads of work in figuring out what is underneath those headings and things to actually break apart themselves. You don't want them to feel like that. You don't want your examiner to be picking over your stuff, trying to kind of analyse and make sense of it themselves. You need to lay that all out for them. So if you find that you only really have like 1 or 2 headings, you need to look within those headings and think about how you can bring them so they're 3, 4, or 5 headings, so you can expand them out a bit further. So minimum of 3, maximum of 5. Another thing that I'd say is if you've got more than 5, you probably need to condense them down. You probably need to look across those headings and say, okay, are there 2 headings that I could kind of bring into one heading? So the optimum number is between 3 and 5, and that is something that I found works really well in a dissertation. And I've been looking after dissertation students for 20 years now, so this is the layout of a discussion chapter. When I see it, those 3 to 5 headings, I'm like, this person has done the work here. They've really thought about what they found. They've really thought about how to communicate that effectively. It's also worth me saying, try not to just replicate the headings that you used for the literature review here, because you're at a different stage of your study here. You're at a stage where you've done the data collection, you've done the data analysis, you now have something to contribute. So you might have had your headings in the literature review, and that was all well and good before you'd done your study, but you have done your study now, you have got something to contribute. So your headings should be different in the discussion to what they were in the literature review. You need to develop some new headings based on what the major takeaways from your study were. When you're trying to figure out what your headings are, it's easy for me to say, but try not to overthink it. So you're coming up with between 3 and 5 headings, 3 and 5 themes for your discussion chapter. And for me to just say, just come up with them, hey, you know, like you can just magic them, you can just pull them out of your hat, shall we say. It's not going to be that easy, but I think you take it slowly, and what you do is you sit down with a pen and a piece of paper and you say to yourself, if I had to sum up my research in a few points, what would I say? And it's best to kind of put your laptop to one side or put your notes to one side when you're doing this, and just go on what is in your head about your research. What were the main kind of key things that really stand out for you? If somebody was to strike up a conversation with you in a coffee shop or wherever, and they said, oh, tell me about your research, what did you find? What are the 3, 4, or 5 things that you would say to them about what you found? And when you start thinking like that, and you haven't got your head in all of the details, you do tend to come up with some compact and some relatable and accessible headings. So don't overthink it. And we have a tendency to do this, don't we, as academics, because you are an academic now, you know, you've done a dissertation, you've done a study. And when we're in that kind of study, academic, scholarly mode, we do tend to get quite long-winded, and we ramble and we waffle. So coming up with these 3 to 5 headings, it's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to be able to do it in 5 minutes. But I think sitting down with a blank piece of paper and just get it out of your head, get it onto the paper, and then start kind of moving it around and organising it. And it might take you a few attempts to do that. It might take you, oh, I've got a very creaky chair. It might take you a couple of days. Coming back to it, thinking about it, then sitting down and going through it again, but it will come, so stick with it. And I just want to say another thing here. When you get to the discussion chapter, you've got a tendency sometimes to want to rush through it, to just get it done, because when you've got your data collected and analysed, you feel like, oh, the bulk of my research is behind me, I am on the home straight now. But often it's a discussion chapter where the really hard work happens, because you are thinking about what you found in light of what already exists out there in the literature. And this is not an easy thing to do. So cut yourself some slack. Don't expect to come up with a discussion chapter in a few days or even a few weeks. It might take you longer than that. And the longer you take, the more thought you give to it, the better quality it's going to be. So just be prepared to take your foot off the gas a little bit when you get to this point. Don't be impatient with yourself. Don't put yourself under too much pressure, because this is going to take some time. And when you've got your headings between 3 and 5 headings, there are some questions that you need to ask yourself when you're writing them. When you're thinking about what the existing literature said in relation to this heading, here are some of the things that should be going through your mind. Looking at what you found, what can you say about the literature? To what extent is it helpful in making sense of what you found? What particular theories and concepts are useful in explaining what emerged from your study? What does the literature not help explain? In what ways is it unhelpful? Was there anything that the literature didn't cover? Has it excluded a consideration of some of your participants or some of your cases? What does your study add to this particular part of the literature? After you've written up the individual sections, the individual headings, you will need to look critically across them. And when you're doing that, you need to ask yourself questions like this. How do all these sections come together around my research questions? What collectively do they suggest about the literature and its coverage of my topic? How might I synthesize some of the areas to better make sense of my findings? Now, after you've written up the main body of your discussion chapter, where you've got your 3 to 5 headings and a consideration of the literature in the context of what you found, you need to talk about limitations. Now, firstly, one thing I've got to say is some advice about what to avoid writing about in this section. Please don't write about the time constraints of your research, because in my view, this is a bit of a nothing thing to write about, because all research is time constrained. There's always more time that we could have had, and had we had more time, we would have been able to do X, Y, and Z. And because this applies to everybody's research, it's just kind of meaningless. So you need to think about some more meaningful things you could talk about in this section. So here are some of the things to include. Could other data have been collected to reinforce the study? Are the results generalizable to groups or cases beyond the ones that you studied? What might the implications of your study be for other groups or other cases? And do you think it's sensible to just directly apply your findings to these groups? Is there anything else that needs to be taken into consideration before your findings can be applied to these people or these things? What other kind of data collection or analysis techniques might have been undertaken? So those are some things to think about in the limitations section. We are nearly there. There is one section to go, and that is future research. And you guessed it, yes, I have some questions for you to think about when you're writing this section, and here they are. What direction could future research take in this area? What research should be done now in this area? To what extent has your study highlighted the need for this additional research and identified more gaps in the literature? What have you discovered that changes things? What new things have you highlighted? And what are the implications of that going to be for future research? Does future research need to be done in a different way? Have you highlighted things that really do need to be taken into consideration when studies are being designed or when samples are being chosen? Okay, that's it. We are done. So those are some headings that you can use when you're starting to structure your own discussion chapter. If you've got any questions or queries, drop them in the comments, and make sure that you tune in next week, because I'm going to be talking about the chapter after this one, the conclusion chapter. So I will see you then.